everyone for joining us um, for our first joint event between the Junior Refugee and Immigration Lawyers Network and the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers. Mouthful event. Tonight, we're joined by 4 recent calls who will be sharing with you their journey into immigration law and how they made that jump from student to articling to lawyer. We worked really hard to find panelists who can speak to the wide variety of practice types, provinces, and ways of entering the profession. Obviously, this isn't the only way. These still aren't the only ways to do it. I am your co-host, Campbell, member of the board of the Junior Refugee and Immigration Lawyers Network and an articling student at Monkhouse Law. I'm joined by my co-host, Andrew Colton, co-chair of the National Student Committee and 3L at University of Ottawa. Do you want to introduce Carl?
For sure. For those who are unfamiliar with Carl, Carl was founded in 2011 as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that serves as an informed national voice on refugee law and the human rights of refugees and forced migrants. Carl carries out its work promoting the human rights of refugees in the courts, before parliamentary committees, in the media, and among its membership. Carl's membership includes over 300 lawyers, academics, and law students from across Canada. Specifically for law students, Carl actually has 12 student-run chapters that operate out of the different law schools. If you're a student and you're looking to be more involved in immigration law during law school, we really strongly encourage you to actually join your school's chapter. If your school does not have a chapter, such as Ryerson, please feel to reach out to us. We're always open to starting a new chapter at a new law school.
So the Junior Refugee and Immigration Lawyers Network is a peer mentorship association for immigration and refugee lawyers and interested law students in Canada. It started off as just a Facebook group for a few friends and now has over 600 members. The purpose of the group is to share ideas, questions, resources about these areas of law and practice in a non-judgmental and confidential way, in a manner to support our peers and assist our clients. We also aim to provide formal and informal mentorship opportunities for young lawyers and law students. If you like what you hear today, we have a Facebook group that you can join by searching Junior Refugee and Immigration Lawyers Network Canada. We ask, however, if you do join today to hold off on posting. We'll create an introduction thread where you can all introduce yourselves without drowning out the important posts and questions that people are asking to help their clients out. So please do introduce yourselves there if you join. And I'll turn it to Andrew for housekeeping.
So the format of tonight's event will have Campbell and I will introduce our 4 speakers. We're going to introduce them through all of their bios. Then we'll pass the mic over to them, at which point they'll each have a chance to very briefly sort of tell you their journey into immigration and refugee law. But the main focus of tonight is really to open the floor to questions. If you have any questions at all about any aspect of immigration or refugee law, we have the Q&A feature. You're free to use it, type in your questions, and we'll be drawing from all of these questions all night. Sometimes we'll merge questions, sometimes we'll speak to a specific question. So our first speaker that we'll have tonight is Jouman El Asmar. Jouman graduated from McGill in 2006 with a degree in psychology and international development studies, where she worked as a research assistant to 2 professors. She graduated from UQAM with a law degree in 2010. During her studies in law, she received 2 academic awards for students with excellent academic standing. Jouman is an attorney and a member in good standing of the Barreau du Québec. She advises and represents clients in immigration and refugee law. She's also a member of the Young Bar Association of Montreal, the Association Québécoise des Avocats et Avocats en droit de l'immigration, where she has been a board member since June 2020, as well as the Canadian Association of Refugee Lawyers, the Canadian Muslim Lawyers Association, Lawyers Without Borders, and the Société Québécoise de Droit International. She's fluent in English, French, and Arabic, and offers legal services in any of these languages.
Aidan Campbell is an associate lawyer at Mahon and Company, whose practice focuses on refugee and immigration litigation. Aidan specializes in assisting individuals making claims for refugee protection, people facing removal from Canada, and those looking to overcome allegations of inadmissibility to Canada based on their medical and social needs, criminal history or association, or for national security reasons. Aidan also assists with family reunification in Canada, and as a member of the LGBTQ community, is sensitive to the difficulties queer families face in navigating Canada's immigration system. Aidan received their Juris Doctor from the University of Toronto in 2018. A focus of their legal education was direct client service and public interest litigation through the Immigration and Refugee Division of Downtown Legal Services, a legal clinic serving low-income individuals. Before joining Mahon and Company, Aidan articled at an immigration firm in Vancouver, BC, where they worked primarily on immigration enforcement matters and assisting those looking to access Canada's economic immigration pathways. Nicholas Hirsch is an immigration and refugee lawyer at Community Legal Services of Ottawa and professor of the Refugee Sponsorship Support Program course at the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law. He has worked extensively in private refugee sponsorship since 2010 with Capital Rainbow Refugee, a community group committed to providing a safe haven for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer refugees. He previously worked in the Protection Division of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Rabat, Morocco. Nicholas has published in peer-reviewed journals on credibility and evidentiary challenges facing LGBTQ claimants in refugee law, as well as a chapter on improving UNHCR protection services for LGBTQ refugees. In 2017 and 2018, he delivered professional development training to the Immigration and Refugee Board's adjudicators, registrar staff, and research director on Guideline 9, proceedings before the IRB involving sexual orientation and gender identity and expression.
And then lastly, joining us from the other end of the country is Natasha Lackney. Natasha is an associate in the Calgary office of Matthews Dinsdale and Clark LLP, where she focuses on assisting clients with their cross-border immigration needs. Natasha regularly supports employers in obtaining work permits for their employees using both the temporary foreign workers and international mobility streams. Once in Canada, Natasha assists and advises clients in obtaining permanent residence and citizenship. Natasha provides guidance to employers when preparing for immigration compliance audits and inspection. She also specializes in preparing spousal sponsorship applications. Natasha is highly experienced in all facets of business immigration law. Prior to joining the firm, Natasha gained a broad range of immigration experience working at a full-service firm in Kitchener-Waterloo and an immigration boutique in Calgary. I'd now like to turn it over to Juman to speak about her journey and how she got started in immigration and refugee law.
Hi, Andrew. So how I got started was actually by accident. It wasn't my intention to end up practicing in immigration law. I articled with a firm of 3 lawyers, so like a small-sized firm. And each of them had their own practice. One was specialized in family law, the other one was in immigration, and the third was in civil and administrative law. So I got to touch a bit upon everything, but I was mostly doing family law because that's where the pressure was at the firm. They had a lot of family law and divorce files. So I did a bit of refugee, but not much. But what I did do of it was, it pleased me, but I didn't have, let's say, the chance and the opportunity to actually dig deep into it. So when I was done my articling and I opened up my own office, naturally I gravitated more towards family law, and these are the type of files I started taking on. And then actually a colleague of mine, about 7 to 8 months after opening up my office, asked me if I would be interested in taking on a refugee case. And I told her, well, I touched upon that quickly in my articling, but I don't think it's something I could do on my own. And she said, oh, don't worry, it's really easy. I'll help you and I'll mentor you and I'll send you the resources. And I was like, okay. So that happened. She transferred the file over to me. And then I did all the introductory readings, the Convention of Refugees, the IRPA, the regulations and all that. And the more I read about it, the more I'm like, well, that's really interesting, actually. And it touches upon international law. And if you remember, I did my minor international development studies. So it reminded me of that time. And so I took on the file, I did the hearing, and we won the hearing. So that gave me like a pretty good boost of confidence. And it was something that I really enjoyed. And I did not get the same satisfaction as when I did my family cases, even when you could say, I can't really say in family law that you win your cases. You just kind of like obtain the divorce judgment for your client, and everyone has different perspective, but for me that's not really a win at the end of the day. It's just a problem that you resolve satisfactorily for the client. But the satisfaction you get when you get a positive decision on a refugee case, a refugee hearing, that's like unmatched, honestly. So it kind of like, I the bug bit me, you could say. And this is when I decided, okay, no, this is really what I want to do. And I started learning more and more about it, reading up on everything, the books, the case laws. I did like a review of the basic case laws, and from that client, another came along. More colleagues started referring me cases, and this is how my practice in immigration law grew.
Fantastic. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the chat who will have tons of questions afterwards. But first, I'd like to pass it off now to Aidan to explain how they got started in immigration and refugee law.
Hi, thanks for having me. I hope my video feed stays consistent. I just got kicked off half a second ago. So apologies if I cut out or if I freeze on you guys. Internet out in Vancouver is lacking, apparently. I got started, I kind of came to law school. Just for context, I'm just halfway through my second year of practice here, having been called in May 2019. So I'm pretty fresh to this, but I went to law school sort of thinking that I'd end up in immigration and refugee law. I made the mistake of going to the University of Toronto, which is not famous for their international human rights or refugee law studies. I didn't know that. I was an idiot and just said, oh, they're fancy. They're the good one. I'll go there. But part of the benefit of that was that there were a handful of people who were interested in this field. And so the opportunities to pursue refugee law studies and get involved in refugee work were actually pretty voluminous. I worked at Downtown Legal Services in the Refugee and Immigration division my first year summer. Following that, my grades really tanked because I kind of spent the rest of my law school mostly working out of DLS and not doing very much else. But the exposure there was really, really next level. I remember talking to other friends in the field who worked at DLS or other similar community clinics, and it was sort of like, because clinics get all of our files came from community referrals, and because often clinics were just getting files that wouldn't pay at all and files that were incredibly too difficult for most lawyers to do on a legal aid certificate, you got really, really, really interesting work. And I've worked on a ton of really complicated big files since leaving school, but I don't know that anything has been as difficult or complicated as some of the files I saw at DLS. So the idea that, working out of clinics, you're not going to get good work is a bit flawed, I think. All that to say, just that the exposure to complicated legal issues at a legal clinic, at least at DLS, in my experience, was really unmatched. And that's something I've heard from other colleagues is, oh, like nothing I saw in my articles at a business immigration firm got touched nearly as much of the IRPA or nearly as much of the scope of the problems that people can have in their immigration, because Canada's immigration system is set up to allow business immigrants in. So if you're doing mostly corporate immigration, and there's nothing wrong with that, it's a very good practice. You certainly do well for yourself, but the system is set up to let your clients in. And working more on enforcement and refugee law, the system is very much set out to get your client the hell out of Canada. pardon my French. And your job is to get in the way of that, which means that you're always in for a bit of a fight. So I guess, like I said, I articled in an immigration firm. Mostly the managing partner there very quickly realized that I was not attentive enough to detail to support his bustling economic immigration practice. And so they kicked me over to do all the enforcement work, which I'm better at. And I found more interesting anyway. So I mostly spent my articles writing federal court factums for visa refusals, kind of supporting that economic immigration side. And they had a lot of consultant referrals on visa refusals. And then working on the smaller end of their enforcement practice, which exposed me to a lot of really interesting work. And then I chose not to stay on there, or maybe they didn't hire me back. No one will ever tell. And began working with Frances Mahon, who trained primarily as a criminal lawyer and mostly is a criminal lawyer, but found herself doing a lot of refugee work. And she found herself totally competent to do that because it's very similar in a trial setting, and she was very good at it, but then would get all these referrals from her refugee clients for immigration work that she wasn't all that familiar with, didn't quite know what she was doing. And I remember kind of the first few days that I started, there were all these Immigration Appeal Division files that I was able to pick up and kind of run with. She's like, I have been trying to figure this out. I don't quite understand it. Spousal sponsorship refusal, don't really know what we're doing here. Plan to learn it, but I hired you so that you would do it. So please just go do these. So I was kind of day one taking over the small immigration practice. And from there, referrals just started coming really quickly. I got a little bit of work from the folks that I articled with here and there, a little bit of work from other places. And then in Vancouver, somewhat bizarrely, or in BC generally, there's no empanelment system. So you can just put your hand up and tell legal aid that you'd like to do refugee work, and they will send you files very, very quickly. Maybe they sent me more files than other folks might have gotten because they knew I was working for somebody who'd already been in the legal aid system for quite a while and was doing a lot of higher end legal aid work. But I'm really not sure, but I've done a lot of legal aid work in my first year and a half here, and it keeps coming. I think I'm on my third or fourth legal aid JR. I don't recommend doing federal court work on legal aid rates, but it's incredibly good training if you can make it work financially. And I've almost completely avoided doing regular immigration. I don't enjoy, I've done a handful of spousal sponsorships, a handful of consultations on other things, but I can do it. I don't like it. It's a lot of, anyway, it's a lot of going back and forth, a lot of document wrangling and client management work that is very, very different from the kind of lawyering that I came here to do. And I think there are other people who do it very, very well and much better than me. So I'm trying to reduce that end of my practice. But all that to say that there is enough work. If you really do just want to do refugee work, you probably need to find something else. But there's enough non-refugee work in the immigration sphere that isn't just getting people work permits, moving people over borders. There's a lot of other work in this field. I know a lot of people who do, well, we'll let the other panelists speak to their, the other things you can hybridize with a refugee practice. But there are definitely various avenues we can all pursue to make a refugee law practice viable. But I'll pass it off to the rest of you.
Awesome. I mean, there's so many threads there to pull and ask questions about. I think we'll definitely circle back to talk about sort of that hybridization and splitting your practice and going into multiple fields. But for now, I'd like to pass it off to Nicholas Hirsch.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I'm a bit biased. I think immigration refugee law is the best area of law to practice. It is a super broad, ever-changing area of law. Not only do you need to have substantive legal knowledge, but you need to be trauma-informed and have cross-cultural competency. And I think no matter what area of immigration refugee law you work in, you definitely make a meaningful difference in the lives of newcomers. So for me, that's the biggest joy of working in this job day to day. So for me, when I was doing my undergrad, I changed my major, I think about 7 or 8 times, and changed universities at least twice. But when I went to law school, I knew for sure I wanted to do immigration refugee law with a specialization in LGBTQ issues. About 7 years before starting law school, I had been teaching English as a second language. So I was doing that at a pretty young age. I don't think my employer knew how young I was, but I was doing that, and I was teaching, during my undergrad and during the summers and holidays. And usually it was with students, international students or entrepreneurs. But there was a point after I finished my undergrad and before starting law school where I was teaching full time in Atlanta, Georgia. And those classes were specifically for newcomers, recently arrived immigrants and refugees. And the classes I taught were 4 hours long. So they were either 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., Monday to Friday. And these students were people that worked more than full-time jobs, who were raising families and still coming to English class 4 hours a day with no complaints. And by that point, I had already known that I wanted to do immigration law, but it just really sealed the deal for me to see how much effort people go through to rebuild a new life for themselves. And I thought, becoming a lawyer, I wanted to be even more involved in making that change for them. So I applied and got into what's called the Programme de droit canadien at the University of Ottawa. So it's a bidual JDLL program. You do both more or less at the same time. And so I moved to Ottawa in August 2010, so a month before law school started. And I was at then a local LGBT bookstore, and I was just chatting with the guy at the registry saying, yeah, this is what I'm here to do from the States. And he said, oh, there's this lawyer named Mike Bell. He's a gay immigration lawyer here in town. Maybe you should contact him. So I just outright emailed him and said, I'm starting law school. This is what I'm really interested in. Can I volunteer with you once a week? And he responded and he said, sure, we'll test it out. And for the first couple months I was there, I was mostly doing administrative, relatively menial work. He would have me transcribe RPG hearing CDs. I remember the first time I did a merit opinion letter for LAO, and I spent something like 5 hours on it. And he's like, you really didn't need to do this. I was like, oh, but it's so important. And then I ended up working for him full time during, I guess, the summer between first year and second year. Also, my first year, I knew of a professor named Nicole Laviolette. Some of you may recognize her name. Chairperson's Guideline 9, the SOGI guideline, is dedicated in her honor. And she's really, I think, the pioneer scholar on the intersection of SOGI and immigration refugee law. So I knew sort of this profile about her before I started law school, but I didn't realize what a superstar she was until I started. And so I emailed her too saying, I'm really interested in doing this work. Can I meet with you, talk about careers and things like that? And she didn't respond, which obviously really disappointed me. But I thought, she probably thinks I'm just some first year. What am I worth? But anyway, a couple months into my first year of law school, Capital Rainbow Refuge was founded by her and her partner. So as you mentioned in the introduction, so we're a group that privately sponsors LGBTQ refugees. So at that time, the lawyer who was also volunteering for was also happened to be the lawyer for Capital Rainbow. So at that time, I was, doing research on resettlement services. I was helping fill in forms, things like that. So again, first summer I worked for him. Second year of law school, I took immigration refugee law and advanced refugee law, which at the time were, I think, the only 2 courses at University of Ottawa related to refugee issues. I think I still volunteered for him, or I did some research positions. And then in my second summer of law school, I worked at an organization called ORAM, the Organization for Refuge, Asylum, and Migration. It's an organization that focuses on international policy as it relates to LGBTQ refugees. At the time, they were headquartered in San Francisco. So I did that for the summer. Then went back to law school. And then for articling, I actually got a position with the UNHCR in Rabat, which is the capital of Morocco. So what had happened is Nicola Violette, my professor, had done the first ever training with UNHCR decision makers on SOGI issues in Morocco. So she ended up chatting with the protection officer at the time, and they said, well, we've got this internship program. If he's interested, let us know. I said, sure. I mean, I for sure interested. So I applied and got that. Got a small micro grant to cover some of the expenses. Did that for 6 months. It was a very mixed experience. I'm happy to chat about it more a bit later. And then the lawyer I had volunteered for and worked for my first summer said, do you want to work here? We need someone in immigration. I was like, for sure, yes. Because immigration jobs, even at that time, were few and far between. So I moved back to Ottawa, worked for him for articling a little bit longer, and then was called to the bar in January 2015. And then the job I have now, at the time, my clinic, Community Legal Services Ottawa, was divided into 3 different offices. And in the South office, their caseworker was going on leave for 15 months to do her master's. So there's that 15-month contract. I enjoyed a lot of doing immigration law, but it was very business oriented, which is not, it's just not my cup of tea. So I applied and got that. And then a full-time position opened up at the clinic I'm at now. So I'll stop there. I think you're on mute, Andrew.
Thank you. What's a Zoom call without someone being on mute when they try to speak? I'd like to now pass it off to Natasha as the last panelist to explain a little bit about her story and how she got started in immigration and refugee law.
Hi, everyone. My story is a little different than I think most of yours. I finished law school and then I ended up doing my master's in corporate commercial law. And I went to law school abroad. So when I came back, I was like, I need to get a job. So I'm originally from Ontario. And so I ended up coming out to Alberta and getting a job at an EPC company, which is an engineering procurement construction company in Calgary. I initially started as a contract administrator, and then I ended up assisting the senior immigration lawyer with her stuff. And so that was my first Russian introduction to immigration law. And during that time, I was working full time and doing my national accreditation exams and trying to qualify into Canada. And then once that was over, I ended up landing an article position in corporate commercial law, which I thought was the best thing of life because that's what I wanted. And quickly I realized that I liked half the practice. I loved contracts, but I loved asset purchase agreements, and I didn't love shareholder agreements. I liked wills, but didn't love estates. And so I was like, what am I supposed to do here now? Like, I only like half the practice, and you can't like half a practice. So I ended up just meeting another immigration lawyer who her and I hit it off, and I joined her firm. And so I did a split article. So I did 6 months at a corporate commercial law firm, and I did 6 months at a boutique corporate immigration law firm. And then I stayed on after getting called. And then from there, I ended up going into, I moved back to Ontario and joined a big national law firm. And I was in their corporate or business immigration law department. I was there for a couple of years, and then I realized I needed to move back to Alberta because that's where my fiance was, and we were doing long distance. So I then switched over to Matthews, who was able to let me work in Alberta, in Calgary, still continuing as a corporate business immigration lawyer. So we assist employers with bringing foreign workers into Canada, helping them bring them into Canada. We help get them to stay in Canada. So we help with their permanent residency applications. We help with their citizen applications. And we try to help them make that transition a little bit smoother. And so that's just how I ended up in immigration. During law school, I always focused on corporate commercial law that's where I wanted to be, and I ended up in immigration. So, I mean, I accidentally fell into this. That's my story.
Fantastic. I think Enbal was going to kick it off from the QA with our first question from the audience.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get Aidan back soon. We're really lucky to have panelists from across Canada joining us today. And we were wondering if you could speak a little bit to unique practices of unique aspects of your practice in your province compared to others.
Whoever wants to chime in can just start and chime in.
Well, I'll start. So I'm based in Quebec, Montreal, Quebec. I don't know if a lot of people might know this, but Quebec also has their own immigration system in parallel with the federal immigration. And it's very particular because Quebec also has to approve the immigrants that they select, in addition to getting the federal approval. So we're talking about mostly economic immigration, whether it's work permits, study permits, sponsorships, permanent residency applications. They have to obtain the approval from the province of Quebec, which is its own procedure with their own forms that need to be filled out, in addition to obtaining the federal approval. It's also the same with the LMIAs. So you go by Service Canada, get the approval for the LMIA, back to Quebec to get the approval for the candidate, and then back to the federal IRCC to obtain the work permit. So it definitely adds like another layer to the practice, an extra step that you need to do, and more knowledge that you need to have, basically, because Quebec also has their own immigration law, their own Ministry of Immigration, and their own regulations that they deal with. And it's also particular in that you have to be a lawyer in the Order of Quebec to be able to do these procedures. I think there is like a special permit that lawyers outside of the province of Quebec can get, for certain files. I'm not sure how it works. I never had to look into it, but I know from colleagues in Ontario that they could do that sometimes. So that's definitely particular. Also, for refugees, they also recently, I don't know if people have been following this, but they kind of limited the private sponsorship for refugees back in 2019. So they reduced the cap on that. So that was also quite problematic. In terms of the regular refugee stream, they cannot really limit that because that is like federal competence. So that always remains in the federal stream. But when we're talking about still, let's say the refugee gets approved at the IRB, you still need to apply to get the CSQ, the Certificat de Sélection du Québec, before going on to apply for PR at the federal level. So yeah, it's not different, I would say. It's just that it adds more work to any file that you need to do in terms of immigration, and it adds more procedures, more bureaucracy, and it's a bit difficult to deal with the Quebec Ministry of Immigration. Adding on top of that, sometimes the frustrations you get with dealing with IRCC. So you butt heads a lot. I think it was Aidan who was saying it's like you're constantly in a mode of like, battle or fight. And I definitely feel that when dealing with the provincial bureaucracy. But it's what you have to do, and it's the steps that you have to go through in order to obtain the required permits or applications for your clients.
Excellent. Did any of the other panelists want to sort of talk about their unique aspects from their province perspective?
Well, I can speak to Alberta. Alberta is interesting because from a corporate immigration standpoint, I'm not sure if people have read the news, but as of November 1st, Alberta is restricting how many, like who can apply for a labor market impact assessment. So that means normally if you want to come to Canada, there's two programs, the Temporary Foreign Worker Program or the International Mobility Program, that you can come to Canada under economic needs. And If you fall under the temporary foreign worker program, you must apply for a labor market impact assessment, which means you have to test the market to see if there's any Canadian or any permanent resident who could qualify for the job first. If not, then you can apply for a labor market impact assessment. And what that means is because of the situation Alberta is in currently economically, they are going to change the program, which will limit how many people can actually limit and also or who can apply for a labor market impact assessment right now. We don't really have too much information because the announcement just came out this week, and the government will release all that information to us on Monday or Sunday. It's interesting because each province has their own provincial immigration, but then they also have the federal immigration program. So, for example, Alberta has made an agreement with the federal government to do this temporarily. We don't know how long it'll be, but it is most likely going to be temporary. I think in 2018, maybe 17, maybe 16, they had created a list of refusals of which LMIA, which knock codes and titles wouldn't be able to apply. For example, engineering jobs wouldn't be able to do it. And there's a list online right now, and I think it consists of about 20 jobs that can apply for an LMIA right now. So it's interesting how Alberta does that. So I mean, you have to find creative ways to bring in your foreign national or use the international mobility program if applicable.
I probably have something to say about BC, but my internet went out, and I would like you to please repeat the question.
Sure. Yeah, it was just talking about what provincial aspect makes practicing immigration and refugee law in your province unique. So in your case, BC.
The BC Provincial Nominee Program is interesting. I don't do a lot of it, so I won't speak to that. But I will say that this week my job is to sit and watch the Cullen Commission on money laundering in BC casinos and real estate. So there's a particular aspect of immigration law in Vancouver that, particularly if you're doing more crimmigration work, that there are just like local immigration dynamics, the large connection to both India and China and Hong Kong that make immigration here very specific. Many of you who follow the kind of actual, like the number trends in Canadian immigration will notice that India and China together make up some gigantic portion of the new PRs in Canada, and a lot of them are in the Vancouver area. So I think there's more immigration work per capita here, even if more immigrants are landing in Toronto. And particularly, there's a wider variety of folks. Most people coming through Europe or coming through out of the Middle East or Africa end up in Toronto. There's a pretty large Persian, Kurdish, and Ethiopian and Eritrean refugee population in Vancouver. Most of my legal aid refugee files are from those countries, with a handful of folks coming up through the States from kind of everywhere. Whereas I know that Toronto gets people from absolutely everywhere. So Vancouver, you end up specialized in sort of a handful of countries, which I think is really interesting. And there's a rising Central and South American refugee population in the Vancouver area that I'm excited to be involved in. But the things that make my job interesting right now are the particular migration flow dynamics that lend to people arriving in the greater Vancouver area.
Excellent. Nick, did you have anything to add?
Sure. So I can't really speak about the Ontario provincial nominee programs because I know they exist. I know them in broad strokes. I couldn't tell you much more than that, though. So I practice in Ottawa. What I can say is, like, in terms of our clients, I mean, I'd say specifically refugee claimants. A lot of them cross regularly through Roxham Road, end up in Montreal. And then a lot of them end up, well, not a lot, but the ones I see move to Ottawa either for better employment prospects because they don't speak French, or people of their diaspora end up living in Ottawa. What I can talk a little bit about is maybe just the community legal clinic system. So the way the clinics work in Ontario is, so we're clinics funded by Legal Aid Ontario, but we're not per se LAO clinics. What this means is generally we take on cases, for example, if an LAO certificate cannot be provided for that service. So just as a quick example, under the Immigration Refugee Protection Regulations, there's a well-known provision called 117.9D. Basically, according to this provision, if you do not declare your family members when you yourself get permanent residence, you can never sponsor them. So sometimes, a little less since the pilot project a year ago, but we still get clients that say, I want to sponsor this family member, I didn't declare them. And what we'll do is we'll prepare a family class application with H&C humanitarian compassionate relief from that provision. So that's just something that Legal Aid Ontario doesn't give a certificate for to pay a private bar lawyer. The other real, I guess, prong of cases we work on is cases where that are so legally complicated or so factually complicated, or the clients are so highly vulnerable that we can't reasonably expect a private bar lawyer to put enough time in, based on the constraints of a legal aid certificate. So, for example, the refugee claims we do, these will be people who have faced high levels of assault or sexual violence or rape, or they're survivors of torture, where they just need a lot of extra time to prepare their evidentiary record and to get to a place where they feel safe and comfortable enough testifying before a board member. I would say the bread and butter of our work these days is a lot of humanitarian and compassionate grounds applications. So cases where there are multiple family members, all with different consequences of hardship that need to be addressed. Or again, people that have severe mental health needs that need to be covered. So those are the types of cases we take on. Our clients are low to no income. So the threshold is pretty similar to what LEO requires for legal aid certificates. Yeah, that's all I'll say about that for the moment.
Okay, excellent. I think just to let everyone in the audience who is pouring forth questions, fantastic. We love the questions. To let you know, we are sort of seeing three trends. One is sort of talking a little bit about the money and the financial viability of immigration law. The other is areas of law that blend well with immigration law if you're going to sort of split your practice or work at the intersection of two areas. And then also just general getting started, tips and areas of resources for people who weren't fortunate enough to think they wanted to do immigration law from year one and then took all the immigration law courses. So I think the first question, so I just wanted to say, we see those questions. We're definitely going to try and get to them tonight. The first question then I'll turn to is really the one that no one wants to talk about is the money aspect of immigration refugee law. How financially viable is it really to be an immigration refugee lawyer? Should you be looking to diversify your practices to make it work? Are there different provinces that are more lucrative, or just talking about the financial aspects of the practice in general? And whichever panelist wants to jump in, go for it.
I can go first. I love to talk about money. I think that this is under discussed in law school, is that you're sort of expected to be a business person very quickly if you're going into niche practice areas. There are compromises that everybody makes in having I'm a contractor at my office. That means I take home a percentage of my billings. That means that when COVID hit, I had about 2 months where I made, enough to get by, but substantially less, probably a third to a quarter of what I had been used to making monthly. And I am lucky enough that I had savings in place to cover that. But for about 2 months, that was just what I was living with. I get paid in a really delayed manner. I get paid monthly. Tomorrow I get paid for work that I did in September, which means that when I first started, there was a lag in terms of actually being able to make an income. I don't think that's that surprising, but people should be aware of that in this practice, that a fee split model is pretty standard at the smaller immigration firms. I was lucky enough that I had enough referral sources and enough work from my principal, or not principal, from the partner or the founder of Mahon Company to be working very quickly and to have a lot of work. But if you move into private practice, you're probably not going to get paid for a while. And that can be really, really daunting coming out of articles with law school debt. So I want to say that up front, it's not easy from the start, but if you're able to weather that, the money does come. You are always still a little bit uncertain. You never really know that another client is going to show up with a problem and with money to pay you, or with a legal aid certificate in hand. Hopefully they will, but who knows? I sort of have work through November right now, and hopefully there will be work in December. I have a handful of larger projects that I think will definitely pay longer term, but that's about my time horizon, and it is slightly terrifying all the time. And I've heard that it gets less terrifying over time, but I haven't seen it yet. And I've talked to more senior lawyers in this field, and they say the same thing. You always are sort of just hoping somebody comes knocking, because it's not really a service that markets well, because most people don't think they're going to have severe immigration problems. Most people don't think they're ever going to make a refugee claim. It's all through word of mouth. It's all people talking to their community members. And so establishing a reputation really, really quickly is really important, I think, and being decent to people. I have people whose immigration applications, were rocky and not great, but who I have received referrals through because I was nice to them early on. I'm on a bunch of different queer lawyer lists in the Vancouver area. That's drummed up a surprising amount of business, frankly. But I'm sure Nicholas can attest that queers stick together. And there's a level of queer separatism that, and just general comfort. I do more. I've done a little bit of trans human rights law, basically only because I am trans and work for somebody who's done human rights law. I don't know what I'm doing in those situations, but I've learned enough to be competent at the Human Rights Tribunal. And I've told this to clients straight up, and they're like, I don't care, you're trans. That's what matters to me. And same thing goes for a lot of queer family resettlement stuff. So tapping community resources is really important, I think. And then knowing that things are going to be rocky and inconsistent going in, and hopefully being able to plan for that. I know that that's really cold comfort when you're sitting with a mound of law school debt, but I would prefer people know that going in.
And I mean, that's fantastic. That's really eye-opening. Does any of our other panelists want to talk about? I mean, Juman, you opened your own practice.
I'm going to just expand a bit on what Aidan said. Everything he said, I concur with 100%, and I've been through that. I just want to expand on the point that he made about, building your reputation and being decent to the clients, being kind, and treating them like, like they're the most important person. Because I found that most of my I would say especially my refugee clients, not so much the economic immigration ones, but the refugee clients have a hard time finding someone that's compassionate and that cares about their case. Most lawyers, especially if it's a legal aid file, and it's very unfortunate to say this, but would treat them as a number, a file number, right? And so when you can have that one-on-one personal relationship with them, that makes all the difference. And even if their file doesn't end up getting a positive result, but because of the relationship you built with them and because of this humanitarian aspect, they're going to be happy with the service you gave them, and they're going to refer other clients to you. So honestly, most of my client base grew out of clients who were satisfied, whether it was from a positive decision or whether it was from, the interactions, the availability. I would say is very important. You have to recognize in immigration and refugee law that this is a vulnerable population. These are people that are worried about their future, that are worried about the outcome of their cases because it could have severe repercussions on their lives. So for you to be there for them, to be available, and I don't, I'm not saying like answer your phone at 1 a.m. when they're calling you or, messaging you on WhatsApp, but to just, if you can be efficient. Let's say I have a policy where within 24 hours I answer all emails or messages. Okay, and they've really appreciated that. They've appreciated that I get back to them, even if it's, you know, have you heard anything about my file? Have I got a hearing date yet? No, we haven't, whatever. Even that simple question, if you can just, have a give and take with the client, it means the world to them. So I find that was what really helped, grow my reputation very, very quickly among the refugee community. And this is when at one point, it was very hard at the beginning when I decided that, okay, I want to switch over to refugee and immigration law. This is what I want to do. At first, it was just like trickling in, a colleague referred me one here, one there. But as soon as like the word got out, and, these people, like Aidan said, they talk. They're in communities, close communities. They go to the same places. Sometimes they frequent the same church or the same mosque or community center or whatever. The word gets around pretty quickly when, a good lawyer comes on board, and the referrals just started pouring in. Another thing I would say is don't hesitate to reach out to organizations that work with refugees. There's a lot of them. For Montreal specifically, we have the Praida, we have the Maison d'Haïti, we have a whole bunch of community organizations that work with refugees in terms of resettlement and translation and other services. And they're always looking to refer clients to lawyers who are available. They have a list. So with these organizations, I also reached out to them. They have my name now. They call me frequently. They, refer me files. That's also another thing. I also wanted to touch on what Aidan said regarding finance. So yes, I did open up my own practice. It wasn't easy financially. I could say that I started off on legal aid, which is normal. Everybody starts off on legal aid when you just start off and you don't have a client base. My first legal aid certificate, I was able to get paid for it, I think 6 or 7 months after I first started. So this is when I got my first income. So I worked basically for free for the first 6 months until I was able to, resolve those files, get to the end of them, and be able to bill legal aid for these certificates. So yeah, definitely having a savings nest helped. What also helped is that, I'm married, so my husband is, he also works. We already have an income at home. So that also gave me the freedom to be able to have this, flexibility and latitude of, okay, it's not a big deal if I don't make, an income in the first 6 to 7 months because it's expected. Another thing that I think people should keep in mind is when you're a sole practitioner, well, I find for me, basically, when you're a sole practitioner, and it's like being an entrepreneur, and this is any entrepreneur in any business, whether you want to open up an Amazon store and sell a product on Amazon, or I don't know, offer a service on a website or whatever, or even be a lawyer. An entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, and the rules don't change. It takes time to build your reputation. It takes time to get the word out there, to market yourself, to give value to the clients, to the customers, for you to start getting the referrals, And I find in our field, it's a lot of word of mouth. I mean, I have a website, I have a Facebook page, all the accoutrements that you need in order to have a practice. But honestly, I did not rely on that. My clients came from referrals, from word of mouth, from other colleagues a lot. Other colleagues were a big source of referrals for me. And after a couple of months, let's say 6 months to a year, it started coming from satisfied clients. So it does take time, and one should expect that. It's just like any other business. If you're gonna give the client value. And if you're going to treat the client like, like he's important to you and you care about his file, he's going to bring you another client. And I find that's the rule across the board for any entrepreneur in any field. So yeah, that's all I want to add.
I'm hoping Natasha might be able to speak a little bit on this topic and tell us how it works from working as an immigration lawyer in a larger full service firm.
Sure. So when you're in a firm, it depends how you're set up in terms of salary. I've always been lucky to be an employee. So I've seen it from a different perspective. But in terms of getting clients, whether you're in a firm setting or you're a contract worker or you're a sole proprietor, I think all of us have to hustle quite a bit to find our clients. So for me, because I'm in business immigration, a lot of my clients are other lawyers who refer work to me. So sometimes I get referrals from other immigration practitioners who do family or criminal and immigration, and they don't do the business aspect. So sometimes they'll send me a couple of files being like, hey, this person's almost out of status. Would you be able to help with the labor market impact assessment, or how do you can you advise on something or whatever? So my referrals come from other immigration practitioners, other lawyers, and a lot comes from human resource personnel that are in companies. So when you're looking to hire, if you're in a company and your human resources can't find someone, they reach out to immigration lawyers to help bring a fantastic candidate from abroad. But in any business, people move jobs, right? Human resource personnel will move for another position or a better position. And if you give good service to that applicant or to that human resource professional, they'll remember you. And when they go to another company, they have an immigration issue, they'll be like, oh yeah, she was really good, or he was great, let me call them. So, I mean, you kind of grow that way just by the number of years and your exposure and the people you communicate with. But I also think that, like both of my colleagues had just stated, I mean, it's really building relationships and getting your name out there and getting your reputation and being responsive. And all of that is so important because when it comes to immigration, everyone is so sensitive, right? Because it's their livelihood. They want to come to Canada for a better life. And so you want to do the best you can for them. And they also need a response. Sometimes it's a little bit more hand holding. Sometimes it's just a quick response to say, hey, thanks so much for your email. I've got it. I'm looking it over and I'll get a response to you quickly. But it's a higher level of service, I think, just because you are really dealing with someone's life and their ability to be in Canada.
Excellent. Thanks. Enbal, I think, has the next question that we're going to ask our panelists from the audience list.
Yes. So we were getting a lot of questions about people who maybe didn't article or didn't study as much of immigration refugee law in law school, asking for suggestions for resources, how to reach out, just kind of in general, how do you get into this field? We've already touched a bit about it already. If you're not, Aidan, doing it all through law school.
I can start just because I didn't intend to be an immigration lawyer. I just kind of accidentally happened. But I would say join as many groups as you can. Join Carl, join the Junior Immigration Refugees Lawyers groups. Join these groups, join the CBA, and join the listserv. The listserv is a part of the CBA, which is a group of immigration lawyers nationally. And people are always posting on the listserv. People are posting in the Facebook group for the Junior Refugee Lawyers, and people are talking about immigration all the time. And someone will help you. Immigration lawyers are so lovely. I think we're the nicest bunch of people because everyone's willing to help you. If you're a junior student, or if you're a junior lawyer and you're saying, hey, I want to learn about immigration law, lawyer, can you help me? Like, if you're a student, you want to learn about it, or you want to talk to an immigration lawyer, they'll make time for you. If you're a junior lawyer or an articling student and you want exposure, I'm sure that there's going to be an immigration lawyer who will mentor you, talk to you, or at least if you take on a file, I'm sure there's going to be someone who's willing to take the time to help you with your file, because you never know. Everyone helps everyone lately, especially on the listserv. You can send a message on the listserv, and in probably 24 hours, you'll have at least 1 to 5 people responding to you with how they've dealt with the same situation. It's very collegial. And then also, it's important to read the acts, right? Read the acts, read the regulations. Um, Canada Immigration, I mean, IRCC has so much information on their website. Google is your best friend. Half the time, if you Google, you'll look on the website and you may find the answer, or you might find contradictory information. IRCC has both on their website half the time, but it's your duty to figure out which is the correct method, right? That's why people are hiring us. But I mean, if you really want to get involved, just start reading. Just because of the coronavirus, a lot of immigration policy is being changed very quickly. Stay on top of IRCC's Twitter feed. Um, Google IRCC updates, because there's a link there that new PDIs are always coming out. So it's really important to just keep reading. There's so many resources out there, and then just connect with as many immigration practitioners as you can. We are a small group of people, and we all kind of know each other, and we're always willing to help one another out. So I would just say, just jump in and don't be afraid to ask for help, because someone will always be happy to help out.
So maybe I can jump in. So first of all, like I just really feel for people, because I know there's so many people that want to get into this field, and the market is just, it's just not there, especially for articling positions. So, as privileged as I am to be in the position that I got, I know that hasn't been everyone's journey, especially for a lot of students that I've taught. In addition to what Natasha mentioned, I think something that is absolutely critically important is proper mentorship. I have met many people who are recent calls who are excellent immigration refugee lawyers. And I've also met immigration refugee lawyers who have been practicing for 20, 30, 40 years, who could learn some new tricks, to put it mildly. And I think the reason for that is because, first of all, a lot of immigration refugee lawyers do work as sole practitioners, which has been the reality for a while. But also, when you don't do well on a file, unless someone tells you, you tend to, in my opinion, think that it's not your fault that your client lost their case. A fun fact is that insurance costs for immigration and refugee lawyers is 50% lower than other areas of law, because when you screw up, your client probably gets deported. So chances are you're not actually going to get sued for malfeasance or incompetence. So even if you are not incompetent, I think it's so important to have someone always to turn to, not only for questions, but truly to collaborate on work. Certainly when I started started practicing law, all of my immigration forms, I always had a colleague look them over. They are super tedious, and I always found that having a fresh set of eyes meant the world of a difference in terms of the quality of the work being done. When I do submissions, I always had someone look them over. Even today, whenever there's a judicial review that comes through our door, a colleague and I always look at the decision. We always strategize about it. For us as a clinic, merit is a key consideration. I do the JR memorandum. I always have a colleague look it over. So for us as a community legal clinic, we are always happy to mentor recent calls, not so recent calls, provide mentorship, provide feedback, really whatever it is, because we at least for me, I genuinely care about the quality of the bar. And vice versa. When I did my first set of detention reviews a couple of years ago, I had never done them. So I spoke to a good friend who's in the private bar, and I said, can I basically shadow you like a student? Basically you certify, you activate the certificate under your name. I will just do the work for you. You review it, and then I will come to the detention review with you. And that was a really, really great experience that I wouldn't have gotten if I had just been asking questions on a listserv. So collaboration is absolutely, absolutely key. Certainly connect, as people mentioned, with refugee organizations, settlement agencies. Just a personal plug for what's called the Refugee Sponsorship Support Program. So this is an organization that started in October 2015. Basically, we recruit lawyers with an immigration law background or not to prepare refugee private sponsorship applications. So since the founding of the program, over 1,400 lawyers have been trained and have done work on thousands of applications. So the SSP still exists. It's now being housed at the Cross-Cultural Services, which is part of RSTP. And I know for a lot of students who I've taught through my class, they've continued volunteering with that, even if they were articling at a firm that doesn't practice yes, thank you. Doesn't practice immigration refugee law. So that's a great way also to use your skills and develop them.
I'd love to jump in and second everything that Nicholas and Natasha just said, but also to really hammer home the variability in the quality of work being done in this bar. Not that you guys, all of you who will become immigration and refugee lawyers, I'm sure will be great. But there is a level of, unfortunately, iffy work in Vancouver. There was recently an immigration lawyer arrested for allegedly making fraudulent refugee claims. It's all over the news. You can see that. There's been a number of immigration lawyers and consultants who've recently been hit with criminal or other charges, being hauled before the Law Society, etc. What Nick says is right. Your clients usually making a complaint to the Law Societies is the last thing on your mind if your job, if you didn't do your job well. And I think that creates a level of moral hazard on the part of immigration lawyers. And I think that the structure of the bar is really unfortunate for not allowing enough mentorship opportunities and for really not setting up internal mentorship opportunities and basically just like relying on people to be self-starters. There's a young law student in the Vancouver area who's been showing up to Carl meetings since I think before she started 1L. It's kind of insane. And recently, I hope she's not watching. Recently, well, she probably is, knowing her, heard two other lawyers more senior than myself talking about how, we need to find her an articling position. Like, this needs to happen. She's volunteered and done work for a bunch of different people, yada, yada, yada. But that's sort of the level that it takes, unfortunately, to find a job in this area, because there just aren't enough larger firms with the financial viability to take people on and to do that mentorship. So really putting yourself, and I just answered somebody's question in the chat, but putting yourself in front of people that you want to work with, I think is the single best thing you can do. And not in a like, hey, let's network kind of way, but in a like, look, I'm interested in what you're doing. Can I be involved? Can I get involved in some of your pro bono work? Can I be whatever? This business still unfortunately runs on a lot of low or no paid student labor. We always pay students that work with us. I know a lot of other people don't. People have mixed opinions on the ethics of unpaid student labor. And Ball, I'm sure, has something to say about this. But there are opportunities, both paid and unpaid, for students in this field, and you should take advantage of them if you're interested.
I'd like to just quickly jump on that and follow up a little bit, because I'm sort of mindful of the fact that for Ontario, at least, we're just sort of entering the articling rush where call day is coming, or not call, interview day is coming up soon. Ontario students are looking for articling positions, and I think for a lot of people who are interested in immigration, they have this feeling that they definitely have to interview the article at an immigration firm to become an immigration lawyer. So I was hoping. I know some of you have talked about it in terms of your experiences, like Natasha didn't article as an immigration student. But could you speak to the idea that the only way to get into immigration law is through articling in immigration, and that perhaps there are other areas of law that are complementary and will help you when you do your immigration work later on.
Okay, I'll start. So I ended up doing a split article, so half in corporate commercial and then half in immigration law. So Alberta, at the time when I articled, it was a 12-month article period, I believe. So 6 months in corporate commercial, 6 in immigration law. And I think immigration law affects people in all different ways and shapes and forms. So, I mean, you could be articling in employment law and it could have an aspect of immigration. You could, because bringing foreign workers, you need to have an employment contract, you need to know all of these employment contracts and termination policies and resignations. I mean, they work hand in hand. On the other side, there's criminal law, right? And then criminal law does impact immigration. If, say, for example, if a foreign national is in Canada and they have a DUI, they need a TRP, a temporary resident permit, or what have you. But immigration is nice because there's a lot of cross laws that happen. So there's criminal, there's family. I mean, you could be bringing someone over. There might be a divorce. There could be an assault charge. I mean, there's so many things that could happen. So I don't think you necessarily have to article in immigration to eventually get into immigration if that is what your passion is. But like Nicholas or Aidan has said, it's really about finding a mentor, a good mentor who will kind of help you find your path into immigration. And then, of course, you have to also take it upon yourself to network, to go out there and ask for help and do the reading. No one's going to read for you. So you have to be able to read the act, read the regulations, and seek help and like when you need it, right? It's not just about having a mentor, but seeking help, asking questions, and help guide you. So, I mean, you could article in anything, but if immigration's your have to be an immigration lawyer, you'll get there eventually.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I just want to add to that, if I may, Andrew. Do we still have a bit of time?
Yes, please.
Just to add to what Natasha said, do you have to article in immigration law? So I would say that no. It would make it harder to practice, though. So what happened with me is, like I said, one of the lawyers practiced immigration law, but she wasn't the main one that I worked with. I worked mostly with a lawyer who did family law. And then when I decided to switch over to immigration law, I did it on my own, and I'm mostly self-taught. I would say even when I was doing my law degree at UQAM between 2007 2010, I think there was one immigration course only being offered at that time, and I didn't even register for it. It was a complimentary course, and it wasn't even what I was thinking about doing. So can you do it on your own? Yes, you can. It's possible. And, I've done it. A lot of colleagues that I know that are sole practitioners have done it. I think the key here, like a lot of the panelists mentioned, is the mentorship. And like Aidan said, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to approach, more senior lawyers and say, hey, can I volunteer with you? Can I shadow you? What I did is when I got my first authorization to appear in federal court, I had never done that before. I emailed the listserv of the Quebec immigration lawyers and said, look, I have my first federal court hearing. Can I, come along with any one of you from now until the month of January? And I honestly got like 6 or 7 responses. So I was able to go with each of these lawyers. And naturally, you strike up conversations, you strike up some sort of professional relationship. You can later on ask them questions. And everyone is, Natasha mentioned that everyone is nice, everyone's friendly, and everyone wants to share. I think there's a big myth around lawyers that they don't want to help other lawyers and they're very competitive. And maybe that's true in other fields like corporate law, I don't know. But in immigration, I really have found it to be the opposite. Maybe because we know that we're the lawyers, immigration lawyers are the minority kind of in that field. So we kind of have a tendency to stick together and to help each other and to help each other succeed because, there's not really competition. It's if I succeed, I'm helping my client who is the immigrant, who is the refugee. And this is, at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. So I think they're very friendly, and you don't have to be shy. You have to really put yourself out there. Go to the events. Well, now with COVID, there's no more events, but I went to all the events. I strike up conversations with random people that I haven't even met, and we start talking. I mean, you have to have this type of personality, especially if you're a sole practitioner. What's also important, I find, is when I rented my first office, it was a shared office space with two other senior lawyers. Okay. So I find having that support as well on a day-to-day basis, having someone to be able to bounce the questions off of, that's also very important. Another thing I want to mention is being self-taught. I see a lot of questions in the chat about, what should I read up on, etc. Okay, so you start off with the basics, which is the Convention of Refugee Law, the IRPA, and I would say the CIC website. Okay, there's a lot of information. One tab takes you to another, which takes you to another link, which takes you to another link. I mean, at one point, let's say when I started reading about, labor market impact assessments, let's say I had like 15 tabs open on my screen, going from one to another, trying to link them all together, literally like with my notepad, taking notes and making my own course about it and learning it. I always had the discipline to do this, and I'm a big reader. I read a lot. I don't mind doing it on my own, and I prefer it this way. That way I can go at my own pace. I would say the operational bulletins on the CIC website. This is a very untapped resource, but when I got my first study permit client, I've never done study permit in my life before, I read the operational bulletin about study permits, and that gives you the perspective from IRCC, from the officer's perspective, what they're looking for in an application, and how you can craft your application in a way that's satisfactory to the criteria and to the way they evaluate them. So this is something I find a lot of people do not do. They think it's okay, it's just for IRCC, for their policies or whatever. But it's very important to know that perspective as well from the other side. And there's a lot of information on it. Even though I'm not in Ontario, the LSO website has a lot of amazing guides and for refugee law that I read up on. Hathaway, the Law of Refugee Status, Chantal Deloge, all the big refugee, the names of refugee law who wrote the books. And I find from the books, I was able to know which case law was important because they keep mentioning them, and from that I made a list, and I printed them all out, and I read them all. So I would say that it took me about a year of me doing all the basic introductory reading for me to and along with the practice for me to say, okay, now I have a good grasp on refugee law and the concepts and the notions. And I at the same time I was taking the files and I was working. Every time a question comes up, you research it. You have so many options out there. You have Cage, LexisNexis. I mean, this is the age of digital technology. Everything is at your fingertips. There is no excuse to say, well, I can't find this information. It's all out there, so a lot of search. Anytime a question pops up, I do a case law search. Reading a case brings you to another, and then you start seeing a trend. Most of these cases are going back to this one. So that must be the main precedent. Okay, so I'll go back to that one and I'll read this one. So it's just a matter of like reading a lot, giving yourself the time to do that. I could say that I haven't, Netflix and chilled in the evening for about 2 years now, because I'm constantly my evenings are spent reading and catching up on case law and things I need to read. Recently I had a case, a very particular question about domestic violence in a country where there's supposedly a democratic state. Okay, so I've never come across that before. So I had to read about the jurisprudence. What's the jurisprudence on, how do they adjudicate domestic violence cases when they claim that the country is a democratic country and can offer state protection to the individual. So, I've read about state protection, but not from this angle. You see what I mean? So every case brings up a new angle, brings up new notion that you need to dig deeper in. And I find always having this curiosity, this thirst for, knowing more and digging deeper into it. Eventually, before you know it, you're going to be, people ask questions or people will come to you, and you're gonna be like, oh well, I know the answer to that, and you're answering that question. You might think that you don't know it, but now at this point, I'm a mentor for two other junior lawyers. Well, I consider myself still junior, but apparently I'm not, right? So I'm a mentor to two other junior lawyers, and I go over their appeal factums. We work together. If they have a question or whatever, they call me, they message me, and I refer them to the same things and to go through the same steps that I went through.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to Enbal for the last question. But because I know she won't plug it, I will also plug all of JRILN's back catalog of webinars. If you are looking to get started and you don't know where to turn to, their back catalog is a really good introduction on a lot of various issues.
Yeah, we'll post the link in the, if anyone hasn't noticed, we've been trying to answer some of the questions and posting links and answers to questions in the chat. So please use those. I'm not sure if they're going to stay up after the webinar ends. So open them now in case they don't. We will post the link to those JRILN webinars. You can hear me awkwardly speaking there in some of those as well. So for our last question, obviously, I know some of you from going to events, that's how we used to get to know each other. COVID's happened, we can't really do that. I was hoping if you could speak to maybe some good and some less good networking strategies that people have been using during COVID to get to know people and get mentors in the field.
I could start if nobody else wants to. I would also like to say, I want to just kind of button another question that I've seen a lot in the chat and that I think is really important to speak to. So I'm going to just grab a tiny bit of extra time here. A lot of people have been asking about work-life balance, vicarious trauma, how to handle the emotional strain of this kind of work. And I think that there are no good answers. I think that there's a lot of burnout in this field for a very good reason, because it is really, really difficult. And as Jivan mentioned, to do this work properly requires just a ton of work. It's so big and so complicated. And you're dealing with that big, complicated mass of case law at the same time as you are trying to manage the emotions of a very, very vulnerable person. And it is not easy. That said, just taking the time to have a life outside of this, I think, is very important. I have carved out more time for Netflix and chilling than it sounds like Juman has, and to maintain friendships with people outside of the law and who do other kinds of things, and people who don't want to talk about war and conflict and the practices of intelligence services in foreign countries all the time. It's good to have a break. But on effective mentorship strategies, I always think that the biggest lesson in networking is that networking is kind of a dirty word for people in this sort of field. Everyone likes to think that they're too cool for it. Everyone always finds the Keener law student just a little bit icky. Having been a Keener law student myself, I understand it, or insufferable. But I would generally recommend that folks really understand the people that they're reaching out to, find something that they've written. Everybody writes somewhere. Find a case that they worked on. Find something that you can talk about, that you can say, hey, I saw this thing that you did and I'm interested in X. I see that you're really interested in Y. So am I. You need something to connect with, because just cold calling people, there are just too many folks out there, and you'll probably let it slip. But if somebody sends me an email, I try to answer everybody who sends me an email. It doesn't happen very often because I'm pretty fresh. Maybe it'll happen more after this. I'm happy to talk to people. You could always send a query through our website. I don't post my email publicly, although I sent it to one trans student in the chat. So you can reach out to me directly. Anybody else, just throw it our email, our web consultation form goes directly to our assistant, and they will filter stuff to me. But just have some hook, have something that shows that they care about, that you've spent the time to reach out to this person as an individual. We're all very, very, very busy, but usually we want to talk about ourselves. So we're also very, very conceited as lawyers. But I'll let somebody else answer.
So I think it's a bit difficult to talk about networking in the era of COVID because it's pretty hard to network in the era of COVID. Again, all I can say is, like, from my personal experience, I just outright sent that annoying email to a lawyer, and it really, really, it really, really helps. So, and I do occasionally get emails from prospective students or current students asking to chat. Again, I try to answer all of them. I hope there are more networking events over Zoom, since that seems to be the way we can socialize right now. Hopefully, maybe Carl can organize those. I think that'd be a really great idea. But otherwise, as Aidan mentioned, I think it's just a matter of trying to find a way to connect with people, or as we've talked about before, just I would ask to volunteer on a project or two.
I'd jump back in to second that. The person that ended up hiring me out of my articles, I reached out to on Twitter at the start of my article. So it was like, hey, you went out on your own very quickly. I'm interested in learning how to do that because I think I might want to. And then a few months later, she came back to me saying, hey, I'm looking to expand from being a sole practitioner. Would you want to take the risk and come work for me? So those kind of things, going in without an agenda, just trying to, again, just throw yourself in front of the train that are these other interesting lawyers that you'd like to work with, goes a long way.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say I've gotten a small paid gig off messaging someone on Twitter who then put me in contact with someone else. So you really, you don't know, message people. Yeah, you don't know what's going to end up leading to something. It's usually not the thing that you think is going to lead to the job that ends up leading to the job. And working with someone on one project, probably unpaid, might lead to a paid one later. Unfortunately, that's kind of how a lot of things work in this business. And with that, Andrew, do you want to close us off?
Sure. I was just going to add, if you message a lawyer and a lawyer says, I'm busy, come back to me in a month, it's not that they're dismissing you. It's that truly they're in the middle of a trial or the middle of a hearing. They don't have capacity, but they still do want to hear from you. So be persistent, even if it doesn't pay off immediately. But yes, to close off, I want to say thank you so much to all four of our panelists. It's been fantastic having you with us, and we're really grateful that we were able to have people join us from across the country. While events are hard in the age of COVID, I think it's really nice that it allows us to get a lot of people who in the same room who wouldn't actually physically be able to be there. So I can't, there's no round of applause, but we would be applauding you if we could. Thank you so much to all of our attendees who are coming in. Again, try and grab those links from the chat. If there are a lot of great resources in there. And again, if you want to get involved in the community, come join Carl, come join JRN, come join Immigration Law on Twitter. Thank you so much. And that will be the end of this webinar. Take care, everyone.